Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Mr. Ziyambi, postponing elections does not preserve stability. It promotes instability and attacks the Constitution. This was said by Tendai Ruben Mbofana, a regular contributor to Zimbabwe's political debate. He's absolutely right. He's spot on. But unfortunately, his warning to Zanu PF will fall on deaf ears. Many people in Zimbabwe know that Zanu PF is a regime that is addicted to absolute power. The 2008 elections were a watershed, and Zanu PF learned a great deal from it. And one of the many things that they learned is that the regime realized that the days of the de facto one-party state winning, sweeping all the seats, rigging the elections and winning all the seats were over. If there was one thing Robert Mugabe would admit was a shocking to his system, his whole political career, it has to be two things. The 2008, when he was forced to go into the GNU, was a shock to him. Here is the man who despised Morgan Tsvangirai and held in great contempt. And yet he was forced to swallow his pride and go into a GNU with the man. That was a real shock to Mugabe. The worst shock, of course, has to be the 2017 military coup. He couldn't believe that some of his own colleagues would have the guts to point a gun at his temple and force him to resign. What Robert Mugabe learned in the GNU was that he could bribe Morgan Tsvangirai and his MDC cronies to forget about the reforms, implementing any meaningful reforms. As much as he didn't expect much resistance from that lot, he must have been pleasantly surprised at how easy it turned out to be. He bribed Morgan Tsvangirai and his MDC friends with the trappings of high office, the same dirty trick that he had used on his own fellow Zanu PF leaders. And he had turned them into yes men who never questioned any of his decisions. I think Mugabe ran one of the most compelling cabinets in human history. They were so accommodating, always ready to grovel, to agree with him, to the point where Margaret Dongo called them Vakadzi va Mugabe in sheer exasperation at the way Zanu PF party leaders, MPs, and the entire cabinet groveled to Mugabe. So Mugabe was well practiced in the art of bribing leaders to do his bidding. But he must have been pleasantly surprised at how easy it was to bribe Morgan Tsvangirai and company. You would think after the ill treatment the MDC leaders had received under Mugabe, they would have the common sense to stand up to him. It was not to be. The MDC leaders fitted in the Mugabe harem and took up their junior positions in the pecking order. Not even SADC was able to nag Morgan Tsvangirai and company to implement even one token reform throughout the GNU. And so, yes, the GNU was a shock. Mugabe was surprised that the SADC and the AU could force him to accept Morgan Tsvangirai as a partner in the GNU. But force him they did. Mugabe was able to bribe Morgan Tsvangirai and company to make sure not even one token reform was implemented. So that at the end of the GNU in 2013, Zanu PF emerged with all its dictatorial powers intact. But this time, they were hiding the dictatorship behind a mask, the multi-party democracy mask. And they've managed to get away with rigged elections ever since, because the MDC CCC leaders have participated in those flawed elections and conned their own followers to do the same to give Zanu PF legitimacy. It is interesting to note that in 2023, both SADC and the AU condemned Zimbabwe's elections as flawed. Mugabe couldn't believe it. Sorry, Mnangagwa could not believe it. But condemn it they did. SADC and the AU, however, could not go the extra mile and deny Mnangagwa legitimacy, because Nelson Chamisa and company had conned millions of their followers to participate in those flawed elections. Here is Mnangagwa boasting about the election and that he doesn't care that SADC and the AU had condemned the process.
Vana vakatuka Zanu PF kana ini ndonyanyisa kufara kuita zvakanaka. Ukavona vavengi vako vachikurumbidza nekuchikanganisa, ukavona vachiti Zanu PF yakaipa, farai, because you are doing correct things for your country. Hongu takaita maelections edu kuna vamwe vaitaura zvisina musoro zvikanzi maelections anofamba zvakanaka ndezvavo.
When you're beginning to have detractors everywhere, since when did SADC and the AU election observers become Zimbabwe's detractors? Mnangagwa got away with the rigged 2023 elections. But make no mistake about it. The damning SADC and the AU election observer team reports scarred him. He knows that the days of getting away with rigged elections are over. What is making Mnangagwa worry is that many Zimbabweans, since the 2023 elections, are waking up to the reality that Nelson Chamisa and company conned the nation to participate in those flawed elections. In other words, the political credibility of Nelson Chamisa has been called to question like never before. People remember very well, and they will keep on reminding him of his lying.
Makorokoto Zimbabwe nokuti hakuna munhu anomira kana denga raronga plan. Denga raronga plan, denga harifo iri. Plan ya Mwari haifo iri. Ini ndatanga kugadzira cabinet. There is no way we are not going to form a new cabinet. There is no way we are not going to have a celebration. There is no way we are not going to have an inauguration. Let's start preparing for our inauguration. Let's start preparing for our celebration.
Many Zimbabweans know that Chamisa lied, and he conned millions to participate in flawed elections. And this is what is making it so difficult for Chamisa to relaunch his so-called blue train. People are beginning to say this is just a repeat of the same dirty trick. Triple C was supposed to win big. It did not. You lied that you had plugged the vote-rigging loopholes, only to con people to participate and perpetuate the dictatorship. So the reality that Chamisa will fail to con millions of Zimbabweans to participate in 2028 is dawning on Zanu PF. And this is why the party is in a panic. Why they are prepared to postpone elections and cause the political instability. What is making the situation even worse is that Zanu PF has seen the level of condemnation by both the international community, SADC, and the AU of what expired a few months ago in Tanzania. What President Hassan of Tanzania did was blatantly rig the elections. And now she is realizing that getting away with it is easier said than done. Here is a recent report on the pressure that the Tanzania government is under.
Samia Suluhu Hassan crowned herself with a victory of 97% of the votes after silencing the very people who challenged her. And when citizens rose up, especially the young, they were met with bullets, brutality, and a blockade on truth. Hundreds killed, hundreds injured, hundreds arrested, entire country living in fear. Let us say his name clearly. Tundu Lissu, the opposition leader charged with treason, locked away simply because he exercised his democratic right to run for elections. And his imprisonment is a broader assault on democracy in Tanzania that is taking away all the promises to the Tanzanian people of their freedom. And to the Tanzanian people, we have heard you. We are on your side. This House has chosen to stand by you.
You have no idea what honey and cinnamon can do for your brain. These two.
On November 26th, the European Parliament did what the African Union refused to do. The same Europeans we accuse of meddling stood up and called out state-sponsored murder in Tanzania, while our own African leaders, sat in their palaces silent as protecting a dictator's 98% election victory with their cowardly silence. This is the bitter truth.
What happened before, during and after the elections in Tanzania was regrettably no surprise. This was not an irregularity, but the systematic destruction of democratic competition. These elections were marred by state-sponsored political repression, targeted abductions, and manipulation. The outcome was decided well before the 29th of October. It began with the suffocation of civic space and the silencing of free media. It continued with the banning of political assemblies and opposition parties, and it became undeniable with the imprisonment of nearly every leading opposition representative, above all the leader of Chadema.
Well, trust me, this video has not gone unnoticed in Zanu PF headquarters. Of course they are aware of it. Of course they are worried. Zanu PF is desperate to hang on to power. And we should remember that this is a regime that is prepared to burn the whole house down to stay in power. What we are seeing in Zimbabwe now is a regime desperately trying to hang on to power. Zanu PF knows that it can rig 2028 elections. It also knows that Chamisa and company will participate in those flawed elections, no matter how flawed the process gets. But what the regime is becoming increasingly aware of is that Chamisa and company may not be able to con millions of Zimbabweans to participate in those flawed elections. And both SADC and the AU have already placed their marker after the 2023 elections. They condemned them, and they know that no meaningful reforms have been implemented in Zimbabwe since then. And they will also know that Zanu PF rigged 2028 elections. And the failure of Chamisa and company to attract huge crowds at his rallies, or to be increasingly called off as corrupt, incompetent, a liar, and a conman in the social media, etc., will only show to the world that Chamisa has lost credibility. Deny Zanu PF the public support in participating in these flawed elections, and SADC will deny Zanu PF legitimacy. The one thing Mnangagwa knows Zanu PF cannot afford is GNU Mark II. The party got away with not even a token reform implemented during the 2008 to 2013 GNU. But it also knows that that stupidity, that foolishness will not be repeated again. And this is why the regime is now trying to postpone elections, if at all possible. But I believe that by the people standing firm, that will only preempt what was going to happen in 2028. Because amending the constitution to allow Mnangagwa to stay until 2030 is one thing. Trying to amend the constitution to allow members of parliament to stay beyond 2028 will be a bridge too far. The people of Zimbabwe must maintain their focus on 2028 elections. They must maintain their position that without reforms, they are not going to participate. And they must maintain their position regarding the opposition. Chamisa and company are corrupt, incompetent, liars, and conmen. They've lost political credibility. The people must clearly state that they are not going to be conned to participate in 2028 by Chamisa and company. Deny Chamisa and company political support now will send a clear message to the AU and SADC that the people of Zimbabwe are no longer prepared to have meaningless elections. We must stand firm on that point. We, the people of Zimbabwe, must stand firm. SADC and AU have already placed their marker. It is for us to take up the challenge. Think about it. Thank you very much. Have a good afternoon.